DevX.
DevX. Yeah. Oh my God. Engineering effectiveness. Head of engineering effectiveness. I'll get there eventually. And she was amazing. So amazing that she left to go and fix someone else's problems because she fixed all of them, which is amazing. But she's one of the organisers of the Atelier. She's fucking sick. You're going to learn a lot from her because I learned a lot from her. Enjoy.
Cool. All right, no pressure to deliver then. So welcome to my talk about screenshot testing. And we're talking about a few sections. So to break things down, it's called Snapshots Through Time because this was a journey of about 4 years from sort of 2019 to 2023. And I'm literally going to take you through that journey of why we introduced screenshot tests in the first place, what were they solving, our first naive implementation at it, the problems that we encountered, the ways that we solved them, where we ended up as of before I left. And then there is a looking ahead section at the end that might be obsolete by now. I don't know what they've done since. But yeah, there was some kind of ideas of what we might have done sort of going forwards. So that's the structure. So to jump in then, why screenshot testing at all? Why do this as a type of automation? So a picture speaks 1,000 words. So here are some pictures of the kinds of things that we were aiming to solve with screenshot tests. So these were all real examples that actually hit production in our app. So not ideal. You've got text and images and stuff overlapping on the screens. So these are quite extreme examples. We had more subtle examples as well. So that on the left, the only thing wrong there is just that the logo of the app isn't present. On the right, that button is supposed to be round. I don't know how well you can see it at a distance, but it's slightly sort of elongated into more of an oblong shape. So there's varying severities and stuff here, right? So we maybe don't care about all of these little things slipping through the net, but we certainly had some that were large enough to make us think, oh gosh, it'd be nice to catch more of these in practice. So I guess we had a bunch of automated testing already at Glean, so it's worth talking a little bit about why none of our existing measures were catching these sorts of problems. Broadly speaking, we had 3 categories of tests around our front-end stuff: unit tests, linting, and end-to-end tests. So these are all in the realm of testing our front-end app, but none of them were enough to catch some of these problems. So unit tests are great. There's lots that we can do with those. Sorry if this isn't legible, but this is just an example unit test that I grabbed from the code. We've got a little pagination component, and it's basically saying if you've got a total of 1 page, then our next and previous button should be disabled. So unit tests are great for that level of thing. In general, things being enabled, things being visible, testing, that whether you can interact with components. It's pretty good for that. You're also able to do some amount of styling stuff. So you can assert, for example, that certain CSS classes are present on a component. So you can say, OK, we've got this component, and when I hover over it, it should add this hover modifier to the CSS. But this isn't really asserting the thing we actually care about at the end. That CSS class can be added, but if none of your CSS references it, then it's not going to do anything to your overall picture that your user ends up seeing. So again, this is maybe compelling, maybe not. I think it's arguable, but it's definitely not going to catch anything, everything. Even if you wrote a test like this for every bit of CSS, you still wouldn't be guaranteed to have perfect styling. So unit tests aren't going to help us here. Linting is another thing that we had a lot of at Glean and that I'm a big fan of. It helps you out a lot. So in particular, we used a tool called StyleLint that was specific to CSS that could just statically analyze your CSS and point out common mistakes. So on the left, I've got a hex code for a color that's just not valid. On the right, I've got a CSS property that's just not correct for the type of component that I'm doing it for. You can also use this sort of thing to enforce best practice. So there might be things that are technically correct, but that you decide as a team are kind of traps, things that have bitten you in the past. And you say, actually, OK, we're not going to use that CSS selector anymore because it's more trouble than it's worth. And this sort of tool is great for that job. Unfortunately, you can write perfectly valid best practice following CSS and still have messed up styling. So again, this is really useful. I'm glad we had it, but doesn't quite do the job. So then all the way up to the heavy-hitting end-to-end tests. So at Glean, we used a tool called Cypress to drive a Chrome browser. So we had a fully deployed version of our web app that we could instruct Cypress to click around and do full user journeys. We had quite a lot of tests. I think it was about sort of 250-ish for not that big an app by the time I left. And this is one that's actually covering, I think, this is covering the 404 page, right? So it's saying, log in, get lost, like get to the 404 page, verify that that's shown, and there should be a link that takes me back, and click on that link, and I should end up back like in the app somewhere sane. But that's the very page, to go back to my examples, that broke. Like the page not found is there on the top. So Cypress was still able to run that test fine because the styling problem doesn't prevent it from interacting and doing the job you've asked it to do. So the end-to-end test around our 404 page didn't catch the fact that our 404 page was a little bit wonky. So we needed something new, and that is where screenshot testing came in. So our first implementation, as I've mentioned, we already had these end-to-end tests that were using Cypress in a browser. So for us, it seemed like a natural, or at least the path of least resistance was to just do more of the same, right? We've already got this kind of process. So let's run some screenshot tests that are just like our end-to-end tests, because it's the same thing that we already know, we're already able to work with, we're already comfortable with it. So we'll add a little Cypress command in the same way that you can instruct Cypress to click on a button or to refresh a page. We'll add a command that tells it to take a screenshot and compare it to like a canned version that we've got, that we maintain in source control of like what it should look like. And of course, things will naturally change over time. So a downside of having these screenshot tests is like, well, sometimes we genuinely want to change how a page looks and it's not broken. So we're going to need like a good, easy update mechanism so that we can sort of say, oh yeah, like that's changed, but in this case it's correct. Like I've added a button to that page. I want that new button to be there. This is now the source of truth. Work from that going forwards. And we also need to be able to see the diff easily when they go wrong. We don't want to add these tests and then have them failing and going, oh, well, I took a screenshot of your page and it didn't look how I wanted it to. And you're like, okay, like how did it look, right? We need it to be easy for us to tell as developers, as testers, this is what it's saying is wrong. So we can make that sort of decision to go back to 3 of whether it's correct or not to update. So again, forgive me, some code that's probably too small to read. We basically just got a big if-else. We used an environment variable to say whether we were updating screenshots or not to basically control these 2 modes. So you had comparison mode. That's the mode our pipeline would run in when CI was running on people's branches. That would basically just take the screenshot and compare it. And if it's wrong, no dice, that's a fail. And then we'd have update mode that people could run locally that would just take the screenshot as it newly is, and if it's different, it would overwrite. And then you could, at pull request time, when people are reviewing changes, you could see those diffs and decide whether they were correct or not. So that's what we ended up with. And this is an example of a screenshot test in its first iteration. It's very, very similar to what our end-to-end test looked like, so, which was a good thing for us. It was something we were already familiar with. So the tests largely looked the same as end-to-end, except for like the final line. So one thing that we will come back to is that of all of these lines of code, the very last line is the one that's telling Cypress to take the screenshot. All the stuff up till then is us driving our app to get to the part of the app that we care about. So we're like logging in as a user, we're going to a certain page, we're controlling some components, and then we're saying, right, we're ready, take the screenshot. So that's what we started with, the simplest thing that could possibly work. And it did work to an extent. And this is the sort of output that we would have. So this is an example screenshot file from the early days. So this is a screenshot that's testing what a user's table looks like when you search for this email should definitely not exist. So yeah, there's an empty table in our app that was screenshotted, and now we know that we can't hopefully mess up that particular page with its styling anymore. And we did have the diffing that I talked about as well. So this is what it looked like on failure, where you'd have kind of expected on the left, actual on the right, and then this kind of pixel highlighty version in the middle that attempts to sort of say, and this is where they differ, because anyone who's played those sort of spot the difference games, even knowing that there's two images and that they're different, it can still be very hard to spot it. So yeah, we've got that sort of middle version that attempts to show you why. So yeah, it worked, but I'm doing this talk because we weren't done. So we added that, and we found very quickly that reliability and speed were two big problems with the approach that we'd taken and with this type of testing in general. These were things that were like consistently, especially for me, I was sort of in a developer experience kind of realm of like worrying about what sort of things were ruining people's days, and screenshot testing was coming up more and more as something that was ruining people's days for being slow and brittle and not fun to work with. So let's look at a few strategies we employed to address it. So the first is this idea of blacking out parts of the screen that we didn't care about. So this was actually built into Cypress's screenshot command. We didn't have to write this, which was nice. You could just give it CSS selectors and just say, OK, this part of the screen I just don't care about. Which is useful for two reasons. It can make your screenshot test a bit more focused. You can just say, actually, like, there's this bit of the screen that doesn't matter if it changes. So that means you have to update your screenshots less often, which is nice for everybody. Also, maybe you've got bits of your screen that are less deterministic, like loading spinners, or in this case, in the top right, we had a little cloud indicator that sort of signaled whether you're online or not. And sometimes it would blip to offline during a test run because of a network problem. And so then the screenshot fails because you've got a cloud with a line through it rather than a regular cloud. Boring, we don't care about that. Just black that area out for all of our screenshot tests and move on. So this was helpful. This was a technique that we had early on to sort of try and help. Focus and hover state were both banes of our existence early on. So this is the same component in 3 different forms. I think the one on the right is what it should look like. The one on the left has focus placed on the input component, so it's got that sort of thick border. The one in the middle has like a very faint highlight that you probably can't see on the 3rd of June, where the mouse happens to be hovering. And so that makes that also fail because Cypress happens to have just put the cursor somewhere for you, helpfully. So again, these are things we tried to address. So we put in some generic like blurring logic to just say, find me what the focus component is and always unfocus it before you take a screenshot, because that way we'll just never have that sort of problem. And then we also told Cypress to just hover the mouse into the bottom left corner of the screen at the point where it took a screenshot, which worked surprisingly well. It did eventually break on a higher Cypress version. It wasn't like a built-in Cypress thing. It was some janky library that someone had made that wasn't ultimately maintained well enough to keep pace with Cypress versions. So we ended up having to solve that a different way, but temporarily this got us out of jail, where we just said, OK, cursor to the bottom left of the screen, where hopefully there's nothing interesting, and these sort of hover artifacts mostly went away. Pixel tolerance was another thing that we had to introduce. So these 2 images look the same to our puny human eyes, but they are in fact different. So this is a sort of case where we would want our test to pass because nothing egregious has gone wrong. We don't really care if there's like really subtle pixel variations between these screenshots. But yeah, computer says no. They've got like some orange, I don't know, some slight difference in the SVG image there that bit us in this particular case. So, so we ended up just saying, OK, we're just going to put like a small pixel tolerance on, small enough that like it's still going to detect genuine drift, but large enough to be like non-zero, so something like this can get through. And that was just a bit of experimenting in practice with like what worked and reduced the flakes while still, detecting real change. And the final thing, I think, in the reliability section is local machine variety, so making these things standard across different developers' ecosystems, because we had people working with Macs, people working on Linux, different versions of Mac as well, particularly with like the different operating system versions that have come in recently. So we very quickly converged on this whole thing has to run in Docker, like even if it's local, because we have to be able to standardize all those moving parts, because otherwise you've got a slightly different version of a font or something, and it just blows your tests up and means that people can't update these tests on their local machines, which we wanted people to be able to do. So yeah, and it's also meant that we could standardize with CI as well. So the Docker image that was used was the same one that was used when our pipeline was running it. So hopefully everything the same, consistent, and we get some sanity. And okay, I lied. That wasn't the last thing. So retries. I have a love-hate relationship with retries, I guess. I hate retries in general, but sometimes they're helpful. So what we ended up with was, even with all of those other techniques, we'd still see timing issues or problems where a screenshot would just not match, and if we just waited or tried again, it would have worked, but it was because the page was still settling down and we've just been a bit eager and taken a screenshot a bit too quickly, right? So we ended up putting in this retry stuff where specifically not the whole test, but just the screenshot command would take a screenshot. Does it match? No. Okay. You know what? I'll wait. I'll take another one, and I'll only fail if it fails 3 times in a row. And that just helped us a bit. The nice aspect of this was we actually put this into generation as well. So when generating new screenshots or updating them, we would use this retry mechanism and wait until we got 2 in a row that matched, in order to sort of guarantee there's some sort of consistency before saying, yes, you're allowed to have that as a... And so that way, you actually got faster feedback if you were about to introduce a flaky screenshot, because, yeah, if your page was just constantly changing, that would never pass, and you would find out, that was nice. So retries can be good, but in general. So speed, I guess, was the other problem that we had. So this is a graph of the number of different screenshot tests that we had over time. So when we first introduced the approach, it only goes back to 2020, we had 6 or something. We just covered a few key pages where we'd seen problems. And then sort of by the end of that graph, you can see that we're over 50. So yeah, the number of screenshots grew. And as it did, the speed with which you could update them became longer. The amount of time it was taking to update them, particularly if you made a generic change somewhere in the system that affected lots of them, it was quite painful. So the first thing we tried to do was mitigate this in a few different ways. So in the CI pipeline, these tests were run in parallel. That was already the case for our end-to-end tests. So it didn't matter too much if they took a little bit of time, because we could just run them over more and more parallel machines. So we could keep our pipeline sort of 15, 20 minutes in total, including everything. That was kind of the aim. And we did manage to stick to that. And then for running locally, we introduced a mode where you could say, OK, I only want to update this particular sort of spec, this test suite. And the test suites would be named after the areas of the system they cared about. So if you knew you'd made a change that affected the login page, then you could just say, OK, I just want to update the login page screenshots. And now rather than having to wait for 50 tests to pass on your local machine, you wait for the 3 you care about and you move on with your life. So that was good, but that doesn't always help, because if you've changed something really general to the app, then you might need to run everything. You've just affected every single screenshot because you've changed the theme or something. So we also added the ability to use the pipeline to do the update for you. So our CI pipeline's got nice parallelism, and also it's not running on your machine. So you can this was triggerable either through manually kicking a runoff, or we also put something into the commit message. So if you started your commit message with update screenshots or something, or maybe US, I think it was, then this would automatically trigger, and it would run in CI in the update mode rather than the compare mode, and it would commit the changes back to your branch. And then when you open your pull request, everyone can see those differences. And as a developer, it means, OK, I can set that going and just move on and go and do something else, and I'm not stuck with my computer running these slow tests and stuff. So this is where we were, I don't know, in maybe sort of 2021-ish or something. And we kind of ran out of ideas or other ways of mitigating. And the feedback we were getting was still, these things are slow, they're annoying. I know I can update them through CI, but it's annoying to have to do that. And I'm having to do it a lot. There's loads of them, they're always changing. And so we needed a change in approach. So basically, it was obvious on reflection that the original plan that we'd gone with wasn't great. The tests were slow because so much of the time was being spent doing stuff that the test didn't care about. So we cared about screenshots and styling, but the test was having to log in as a user, set up the specific sequence of user steps to get to a particular part of the app, only to then take a screenshot, all of which is massive waste because we don't actually care about testing the flow. We've got end-to-end tests for that. So Storybook is a tool that allows you to render bits of your app in isolation. It's not the only tool that does this. There's lots out there, I think, but it was one that we'd worked with before. So it basically allows you to take a component or a whole page of your app and inject sort of fake stub data into it like you would in a unit test and say, right, now render that, please. And you can write a bunch of these stories, so each story being like a component in a particular state, and then you can stand those up as like a separate web app to your, in our CI pipeline that's deploying a version of the app, it could deploy this Storybook instance as well alongside. It's just literally, basically imagine a bullet point list that you can just click down and go, right, login page, forgot password page, and it's all just there. With everything else sort of mocked out, stubbed out, so it's not doing real API requests or anything like that. So yeah, this is kind of what it ends up looking like in the browser. You've got your list down here on the left, things like audio import modal, collection list, definition modal, whatever it is, and then you've got your component there. And now, like our screenshot tests just become 2 lines. Every single test is just 2 lines now. It's just visit the story I care about in Storybook and take a screenshot of it, maybe at this browser size or whatever. So immediate benefit is it makes the tests simpler to write, but also it makes them a lot faster. It also makes them more isolated if we want them to be. So previously, modals, we were having to drive the real app in order to like get to the point where the modal popped up, and then we'd take a screenshot of the whole page that would happen to include all this kind of background noise. So sometimes this screenshot on the left would have to be updated because some part of the background noise has changed. But actually, this screenshot only cares about that modal. It shouldn't have to worry about what's behind it. So now we're in Storybook land. We can say, hey, Storybook, I want you to render just this modal on a blank background, please. And so it's like the blackout benefit from before, but more advanced. We can do more with it and just say, all we care about is that modal on its own. And then that screenshot churns less, which is nice. And the hovering problem that I said when we upgraded Cypress enough, we could no longer get it to hover the mouse in the bottom left. So we solved this a different way as well. We ended up making like a hover shield component. Because we're no longer like in our real app, we sort of have control over these stories we're creating. So we basically just added a transparent component that fills the page and has a massive Z-index to sit on top of everything and disables cursor interaction. So now it doesn't matter where Cypress has the cursor. It can be anywhere on the page. We don't get the hover artifacts, which is nice. And it's separated from our real code. It's only in the stories that we do this. But yeah, it allowed us to fix the hovering properly as well, which wasn't something we envisaged when we started on this. It was just a nice side benefit. Local updates become simpler as well because, now a developer just has to run Storybook and run the screenshot tests. Before, they had to stand the whole app up, which was, using more of their resources and just a bit more complicated to do. I guess the overall impact, so this is the before. So we had 60-odd screenshots. It took 12 minutes to run it in serial on a powerful CI machine. Locally, it didn't time it because you just wouldn't, because it was just long, too long. So don't know, but a long time. After we introduced Storybook, it took a bit of time to port, so we actually gained tests. We had 65 by the time it was fully done. 2 minutes in CI, 6 to 8 minutes locally. So 6 to 8 minutes is still, it's not lightning fast, but it's now back to the point where you can say, okay, I'm going to update all the screenshots. I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea. By the time I'm back, it's done. I can commit my branch and move on. This was nice. It kind of did what we wanted to. I guess we're always iterating. We're never done. So I had ideas about where we might go to from where we ended up. Because since introducing Storybook, maybe because the screenshot test became easier to work with again, they exploded. So by the time we sort of got to, when I wrote this talk, we had about 150 from 50. And so, yes, we've improved the speed, but now the numbers increased again. And so this was starting to become a problem again. People were starting to raise it again as something that's troubling them. So Again, it was like, can we have a step back and revisit the approach? Is the approach correct? And there's a thing called Cypress component testing. Playwright has it as well, which basically brings the storybook job directly into Cypress itself. So rather than you having these two tools where you stand up Storybook and run Cypress against it, you can tell Cypress itself, hey, I want you to render this fake version directly into the browser and then screenshot it. So I don't know, maybe you've done it now. Yeah, as of when I was thinking about this and writing this talk, this was just a potential for feature that might get us some more speed. And yeah, like then a screenshot test potentially just looks like this, where you say, hey, Cypress, mount me this component with this test data and screenshot it. And now that we don't even have Storybook to maintain. So yeah, in conclusion, screenshot testing, we only introduced it for style regressions that other layers couldn't get. So it's not a way of end-to-end testing behavior or anything like that. It's purely for catching these style problems. Running them on the most lightweight thing possible is a good idea to reduce flakes, make it faster, so not your full app if you can avoid it. And stamping out hovering and focus problems is also important. Pixel tolerance, consistency checks, retries, and maybe over time, but that's me. Thank you.
So there was just the first PR for it in Playwright yesterday.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, so Matt's having a look at it.
That's exciting. Cool.
So, if you have any questions for Alyssa, I would recommend asking her about Cypress, because she gets really passionate about it. But, are there any questions for Alyssa? I am.
How do you handle A/B testing with screenshot tests?
Oh, we didn't. Yeah, we didn't. So I guess in general, we had feature flags in the app. And I guess if we had, I imagine if we had A/B testing, we'd just have, we'd have stories for both. I guess you'd have screenshots of both ways, both modes. And I guess hope that it doesn't get too complicated. And you don't end up with stories A, B, C, multiplied by permissions X, Y, Z. You know, you can imagine it exploding. We definitely had a few where it exploded like that. I think we have one particular layout in the app that's quite complicated, where it's quite responsive to resize, and also it's got different panels you can toggle in and out. So that one for screenshot testing was a bit of a nightmare, because it ended up, it was like one page, but it had loads and loads of variants. And I think we did like loop over all the variants and screenshot them all. But I guess, yeah, eventually it feels like that's probably not going to scale. We might need to like cherry pick, I guess, or do something. But yeah, if it's not too unwieldy, then I guess a thing I didn't mention as well was we had light and dark mode, and we ended up making it so that the screenshot command would generically, it would take the light version and the dark version and just put -dark on the end or whatever. So every screenshot would capture both of those. So yeah, I guess A/B would be similar to that.
Cool. Well.
Awesome.